Yo, what's going on guys, it's Cynical and welcome back to another video. We finally did it. We have received the second Final Fantasy XVI trailer and it is, quite simply put, glorious. Aside from Final Fantasy VII Remake, this is probably the most excited I've been for a Final Fantasy game. 16 just looks absolutely stunning. It looks simply nutritious. I just cannot wait, and I love this direction that Square Enix taking 16 and returning to that high fantasy setting, with the game's tone and atmosphere feeling a lot darker compared to previous Final Fantasy entries. The warring regions fighting over the control of the Mother Crystal, with this whole concept of dominance controlling the power of icons, using the powers of summons like Ifrit or Shiva to, of course, wage war. Yeah, this looks like an amazing setup. I'm really looking forward to this Final Fantasy game, and the fact that it is, of course, being helmed by Yoshida, who is, of course, responsible for Final Fantasy XIV, which has become massively successful over the past few years. I think this is certainly going to be one for the books, and this trailer is displaying the absolute promise this game holds. So let's talk a little bit about what we saw in this trailer. There's quite a bit to digest here. I want to quickly just touch upon the story side of things, and then we'll dive right into the meat of everything, which is, of course, the gameplay, what I really do want to focus on, and what honestly gets me probably the most excited. So the world of Final Fantasy XVI is known as Valicia, and is made up of Mother Crystals. These Mother Crystals allow people to harness its powers in order to use and conjure magics. The world is made up of 6 different nations: Rosaria, Sambrique, the Kingdom of Waloed, the Dhalmekian Republic, the Iron Kingdom, and the Crystalline Dominion. Each nation has a figure known as a dominant, which is a person that is able to use and harness the powers of the icons, which are, of course, the summons like Ifrit, Shiva, Garuda, Bahamut, etc. For our main protagonist, he is known as Clive Rosfield, and he is the dominant for Phoenix. It's explained that this world has resided in peace for quite some time, but during the events of Final Fantasy XVI, we'll experience this world going to war, with each of these nations fighting over the power of the Mother Crystals. So yes, this is going to be quite a political Final Fantasy game. It's not, of course, unknown territory when it comes to Final Fantasy, but the concept that I really do like is how each of these 6 nations have a different dominant, and each of these dominants have powers over the different icons. So when looking at the Dhalmekian Republic, Hugo Kupka is the dominant for that nation and has control over the icon of Titan. The Kingdom of Waloed has control over the icon Garuda, which the dominant for that nation is Benedicta Harmon. These dominants are apparently treated as royalty within each nation, so for us being in the shoes of Clive, we're a pretty high up there figure. It's explained in Clive's character information that he's set on a path of revenge, so sometime early on in the story, something pretty tragic happens to him. And along the way, we get caught up in the waging war between each of the nations, trying to take power and control over the Mother Crystals. This tragic event likely has something to do with Joshua, as in the reveal trailer for 16, we do see a scene where Joshua is covered in blood. He's having a bit of a moment. He too is also a dominant as well, so something clearly pretty bad happens to him, as also the character information of Joshua on the official website reads that he got swept up into apparently tragic events that change Clive's life forever. And also it seems like there is a time skip in the game, so it looks like for one big portion of the game you were playing as Clive in his younger years, and for the other portion it's Clive in his later years. So I think this concept of going on this grand adventure to fight this war, to defend your nation, is kind of a cool concept, but on top of also fighting against these other dominants who have the power of these other icons. From the gameplay, it seems like we're going to be able to harness the power of multiple different icons, which would inevitably mean that we will have to face off against each dominant, and once defeated, we will harness the power of their icon. Within the gameplay, we literally see the character being able to switch between icons on the move. As we can see here, by pressing L2, it looks like we can switch between 3 available icons, which is Phoenix, Titan, and Garuda. We'll see the active abilities down the bottom right of the screen. These of course pertain to that of Garuda, which is currently equipped. These abilities are Gouge, Wicked Wheel, Deadly Embrace, and just the standard jump. Midway through this combo, the player switches icons to that of Titan, and the active ability set changes to Wind Up, Upheaval, and Titanic Block. So what I really like about this gameplay setup is that depending on what icon you have, you'll have a different playstyle and ability set at your disposal. And the fact that you can actually switch it real time on the fly between what looks like 3 different icons is going to really put in some nice variety when it comes to the combat gameplay of this game. Now, the abilities that we just talked about seem like they're activated by holding down R2. If R2 isn't held down, then you'll have the standard attack button, which I'm assuming is binded to that of the square or X button. And then for the triangle, it seems like it'll be a magic that pertains to whatever summon you have. So for Phoenix, it'll be Fire, or let's say for Shiva, it'll be Blizzard. When looking at those R2 abilities, I don't think they're resource dependent, as we actually see Clive using those abilities, building that special resource gauge underneath the health bar. There's 3 of these bars and they can each individually be filled up. When filled up, they will appear orange. It makes me think, could this be some kind of devil trigger type system, similar to, Devil May Cry, where these gauges could represent using a special crazy powerful form whilst in combat. If we look at the circle input on the ability UI, depending on what icon you have, these are different. So for like Garuda, it's Deadly Embrace. For Phoenix, it's Phoenix Shift. For Odin, it's Army of Darkness. And for Titan, it's Titanic Block. It makes me think the gauge might possibly pertain to that circle input ability. I don't believe throughout the trailer we actually ever saw the gauge being used or the circle inputs ever being activated. So it's currently unknown as to what the gauge is actually used for, and furthermore what those circle input abilities actually do. In this gameplay scene where we see the player equipped with the Shiva icon, the ability that's being used here is Thunderstorm, and the color of the ability icons are purple, which is the exact same color that refers to the icon of Ramu in the game. So it's interesting, the player is equipped with the icon of Shiva, yet is using Ramu-based abilities. This is definitely a Ramu ability, it's thunder, and it also looks like Clive pulls out something like Ramu's staff. So is it a setup too where you can also mix and match and take out abilities and equip them onto other icons? Possibly. Now, one thing that we have talked about in the ways of the gameplay for 16 is that it does look very real time. Just from that first trailer that we got back in 2020, it gave us this idea that this is probably the most real-time Final Fantasy game we've had, aside from the recent Stranger of Paradise, and that 16 leans into the realm of being something like an action game similar to Bayonetta or Devil May Cry. It seems extremely real-time. Now, this gameplay, while it certainly does still seem very Devil May Cry-ish and very much real-time, more so than what we had in 15 or with the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I certainly do get Final Fantasy VII Remake type vibes, but I'm willing to believe that this does certainly still lean in towards the realm of being something like a Devil May Cry type game. The fact that we have a jump input which looks like it's bound to that of the X or A button screams the fact that this really is real time, and not only that, I think the biggest giveaway here is probably the combo counting that is on the right of the screen. So the different abilities and dodges and all sorts of different other things that you're engaging in and executing in combat is recorded on the right of the screen, and there's different stars to, I guess, represent how technical and, I guess, impressive the ability you just executed is. This is 100% the sort of thing you'd come to expect for an action game like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta. So it's going to be interesting. Is there a score system that is attached to how well you perform in each combat scenario at the end of maybe each chapter of the game? And just like in DMC, you're given a rank or something. The stars and stuff kind of scream the fact that, yeah, you will be sort of ranked on your performance. Maybe you garner more XP as well as items at the end of a combat situation, depending on how many stars you accumulated. But to me, just seeing that kind of a system in a Final Fantasy game honestly does scream the fact that this truly is real time. While there definitely do seem to be quite a few different cinematic moments within the gameplay, which really isn't anything new when it comes to modern Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy VII Remake really harnessed this a lot with these sort of in-game, mid-combat, mid-boss fight cutscenes and whatnot. And there are some reminiscent parts and feelings towards the gameplay that seem like they're taking notes from the 7 remake. I do feel as if this is truly real time. It looks like we can also shortcut items to the D-pad. So in this screen, we've got potion, high potion, and strength tonic shortcutted. And also too, just above the HP bar, we can see some icons for what perks we currently have activated. These will just be, you know, your standard buffs, like a strength boost. So let's say you use the strength tonic, no doubt there'll be a little icon up above the HP bar next to perks that will represent the fact that you are strength boosted. And that chicken drumstick icon makes me think that, yeah, there's probably going to be a food system in this game. So if you eat food, that food icon might light up, or this player might already have the food buff activated, which is cool because like it was a really neat thing in Final Fantasy 15, the whole food system, so that might return here for 16. Also, it looks like the stagger bar from Final Fantasy 7 Remake has made its return to Final Fantasy 16, so the more that you absolutely pummel this shit out of an enemy, their stagger bar will gradually increase to a point where they eventually become staggered and essentially stunned for you to unleash raining hell upon them. I believe we saw a few boss encounters throughout this trailer fighting off against the actual icons, and during this time of fighting the literal icons, you are actually using an icon as yourself, as the player, so that's kind of cool. We see this fight between Garuda and Ifrit, with the player being Ifrit, and you're fighting Garuda. One thing that is very noticeable here, though, is, for one, again, those cinematic moments in gameplay just look absolutely stunning. This is something that obviously Square Enix really like. Final Fantasy VII Remake told us this, as well as Kingdom Hearts 3, and again, they're using this for 16. But I noticed that specifically in the Garuda encounter right here, we see Ifrit, the player, get dismembered. The arm gets completely chopped off. And even from what we saw in the very first Final Fantasy 16 trailer, it looks like this Final Fantasy game is going to be a little bit more raw this time around, a little bit more brutal, a little bit more violent than what we're usually used to with Final Fantasy. Blood and all that kind of thing, and like violence isn't really anything that's new to Final Fantasy, but Final Fantasy certainly doesn't go to the sky's the limit with violence or anything like that, and it seems like this is probably going to be the most brutal entry we've had so far. So definitely looking forward to the darker tones that 16 is going to offer. I do wonder how these icon battles are going to work. It doesn't really seem like it's true gameplay when we've seen the actual icon boss encounters here. It seems more like just these cinematic cutscene in-gameplay moments where the player is using Ifrit. There's another one here of like Ifrit versus Bahamut, and then Bahamut's using Mega Flare, which, oh my god, the animations and stuff of this game, by the way, look incredible, that Mega Flare. But is this just literally a moment of like summoning, and it's just a quick cutscene, how like summons kind of usually work in Final Fantasy games? Or do we actually get to like literally harness the power of the summon and control them? This game is also looking completely gorgeous, a real step up from what we saw back in 2020, though I do have to say, even the footage of 2020, the game was looking quite polished for that time, even though it was midway through development, but now we're seeing the game at a stage where it's in its final stretches. There were also some additional screenshots that were released over on the official website that show us a few more locations, with Clive being in a forest. Like, it just looks simply beautiful. And I am really liking the sort of, I guess, variety of environments we're going to be getting here. Like, it's the to-be-expected biomes for a Final Fantasy game. So you got your forest, you've got your swamp, you've got your desert location, and different medieval type fantasy towns and cities. But they really do look gorgeous. The presentation of this Final Fantasy game looks incredible. Really, I feel like Square Enix have come a long way with the visuals of Final Fantasy. 15 was a pretty good looking game, but it was a little muddy in some areas. But looking at 16, it looks so polished. So yeah, definitely a gorgeous looking game. Character models and everything look on point as per usual. Particle effects are simply just pure eye candy. This is something that Square Enix always nail. They always do a good job of their particle effects. It even looks like at some point Clive gets a bit of sexy time going on. So yeah, this is certainly more of a mature Final Fantasy game with its darker tones, darker atmosphere, more of the brutal violence kind of going on, being more in your face. I just think all round, this is sort of the Final Fantasy game that a lot of people have been wanting for quite some time now, so definitely looking forward to it. Now to wrap up, we finally got the release year for this game, and it is summer 2023. I was thinking with the news that we got not too long ago about this game being almost finished and in its polishing stage, that it could be possible that we'd see Final Fantasy XVI release maybe at the very end of this year, with of course Forspoken being in October. That would give room for a November-December release, but summer 2023, that's absolutely fine. I think, to be honest, that was kind of expected. That of course means any time from June through to September of next year, will be receiving Final Fantasy XVI. So obviously this is Square Enix's next major AAA title. This means that for the majority of 2023, or at least the first half, we will be getting the full promotional cycle of this game. I am expecting maybe one more trailer sometime this year, maybe at the Tokyo Game Show, if not the Game Awards, but otherwise I think the deep dives and all of that kind of thing will start to happen next year. What this means for Kingdom Hearts 4 though, I thought I'd quickly just slot this in, is that yeah, I think we're looking at like a 2024 release date for Kingdom Hearts 4, and honestly that's what I was expecting. I wouldn't expect Square Enix to be dropping KH4 and 16 in the same year. We do know Kingdom Hearts 4 is currently in early development, as it's been said. I think it's further into development than like a lot of people are thinking, but still I think 2024, end of 24 for KH4 makes sense, with now having 16 halfway through, if not towards the end of 2023. But however guys, that's my little take on Final Fantasy 16. Hopefully that's given you guys a better idea as to what this game is looking like so far. I am completely ecstatic for this. I would love to know your guys' thoughts and opinions towards it. However, I'm cynical. Hopefully having a fantastic day, and I'll catch you guys real soon. Peace.